I simply couldn't believe what I was seeing. Johnny, whom I had been married to for 7 years, was sitting at the dining car table with her friend Jim. I looked around, thinking there must be a conductor or waiter somewhere, but strangely, there was none at that moment. All the love I had for my wife had died. Supposedly, it was supposed to be a fun excursion for the two of us, an opportunity to reconnect. I was surprised when she told me that Jim, her coworker friend, would be joining us. I insisted that he was a friend to both of us, but to be honest, I couldn't care less about this guy, and at that moment, I couldn't think of a single reason why he would want to join us. But now I knew, and I also knew that I would need evidence for my divorce. Oh yes, it was all over between us. Of course, seeing them in the act on the table mildly excited me, but I wasn't going to tolerate such disrespect. I took out my cell phone and started recording their date. I had no desire to see or hear what they had to say. It seemed like they slept on that table for an eternity, and I couldn't believe how rough Jim was with her. She seemed to like it. Maybe I should have been that rough with her, but it just wasn't my style. Finally, they stopped, and Johnny straightened her dress. "We need to be careful," she said as they took their seats. "If George finds out about us, he won't be happy." "It doesn't matter," Jim said with a mocking smile. "We've been sleeping together all of last year, and he still hasn't found out." What did I think to myself? This has been going on for a year. I knew Johnny and I had some strained relationships due to my busy work schedule, but it kept a roof over our heads. Sure, Johnny also worked, but what she earned went towards things she wanted: clothes, accessories, salon visits, and so on. The whole idea of taking a weekend to travel by train, see the sights, and spend time in each other's arms had been lost on her. "So, what are you going to do when you go back to him?" Jim asked. "Did you do what I told you about birth control?" Johnny inquired. He nodded. "Yes," he said. "I stopped taking it so I could get pregnant. I told George I'm on my period this week. So, he's not expecting any affection." They both laughed heartily. "So, why do you stay with him?" Jim asked. "Obviously, you don't love him, or you wouldn't treat him like this." "Well, it's not that I don't love him," she said. "I like him enough. But I just don't feel that passionate love for him. Plus, he has a good salary, and you know I couldn't live on what I earn." "Are you staying with him for the money?" he asserted. She nodded emphatically. "He said he could never afford the comfort he's providing on this trip, and neither could you." "When do you want to meet again?" Jim asked. "I don't know. Maybe later tonight after he falls asleep," she said. I had seen and heard enough, and I stopped the video. I returned to the car where Johnny and I had stopped and considered my options. Divorce was inevitable, but there had to be something more. Both she and her boyfriend needed to be held accountable. I took out my phone again and went to the contacts section, searching for my lawyer's number, Felipe Jurgen. A man answered the call. "Felipe, it's Jorge," I said. "I need you to start preparing divorce papers for me, and I want you to use the prenuptial agreement." "Divorce?" Felipe asked, surprised. "Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "For what reason?" Felipe asked. "Marital infidelity," I said. "I have a video, and I can send it to you as evidence." "Yes, please do," Felipe said. "I have the prenuptial agreement here. So, the paperwork won't take long. When do you want the papers to be served?" "The sooner, the better," I said. "We'll be back in Springfield in a couple of days, so maybe you can arrange for them to be served at the station. I also need to know everything you can find about her boyfriend, Jim Simpson." "He works with her," I said. "I'll have our investigator looking into it," Felipe replied. "Send me the video, and I'll take a look. Don't do anything reckless, understood?" "Yes, of course," I said. "You know me." "Yes, I do," Felipe said. "That's why I told you not to do anything." I transferred the video to the tablet, turned on my phone's hotspot, and used it to connect my tablet to our home network through a VPN, virtual private network that I had set up some time ago to securely access my files from anywhere in the world. The first thing I did was log into our online banking system and go through the usual routine, closing joint cards, transferring funds, and so on. I didn't want to take any risks, even considering the prenuptial agreement. Another malicious thought crossed my mind. Johnny loved using the home computer for her personal emails. Fortunately, she wasn't very savvy when it came to security, so I was able to log into her email account with a couple of clicks. I copied the video first to the tablet and then to the home computer. Opening her email client, I composed an email trying to mimic her tone. I used a cliché subject that sounded like hers: "Take a look at my fun train journey." Then, I attached the video to the email and sent it to everyone on her contact list: friends, family, colleagues, anyone I could find. I watched it for a minute and then hit send. I opened the compartment door just in time to see one of the conductors. I signaled for him to come closer. When he looked at me, I asked, "Everything okay, sir?" "Well, my wife says she wants to move to another compartment," I said. "Could you tell me which compartment Jim Simpson is in?" The conductor briefly checked his tablet before responding. "Do you want us to transfer your wife's things to this compartment?" He asked, "Are you sure?" "It's economy class and not as pretty as this one." "That's life," I said, nodding understandingly. "Okay," the conductor said. "I'll help you collect her things." We worked quickly, not caring much about how well her clothes were packed. Once we finished, I helped the conductor carry her things to her compartment, which was less than half the size of ours. I chuckled to myself, tossing her belongings onto her small bunk. Let her figure it out herself, I thought. "I'll need to make her a new magnetic key card," the conductor said. He pulled a blank card from his pocket and inserted it into a magnetic recording device connected to his tablet. After he finished, he looked at me. "Do you know where she is?" he asked. "Yes, I know where she was last time I saw her," I said. "Lead the way." We walked through the entire train and entered the dining car. Johnny and Jim were still exchanging glances as we approached. I sat in one of the table chairs, and the conductor got Johnny's attention. "Yes?" she asked, looking anxious. "I need to give you your new card," he said. "And take the old one." She looked surprised. "What do you mean?" she asked. Apparently, there was a seating arrangement mistake. "So, I need to give you a new key," I said. "By the way, Johnny, did you ever tell him about the prenuptial agreement you signed when we got married?" "What are you talking about?" Jim asked. "Well, if you plan on taking someone else's wife, you should get to know her a little," I said. "Okay," Jim stammered. "Listen, this was all just for fun," he said. "We didn't mean anything by it." Johnny interjected, "That's right, Jorge. It won't affect our marriage in the slightest." "Really?" I said, pulling out my tablet. I fast-forwarded the video to the part where they were talking and pressed the play button. "Listen to this," I said. "I like him enough. But I just don't feel that passionate love for him, plus he brings in a good salary. And you know I couldn't live on what I earn," Johnny's voice said on the video. "So, you're staying with him for the money," Jim said in the video. She nodded. I stopped the video and looked at her. "So," I said, "I'm just a walking check to you, darling." I started to take off my wedding ring and added, "And since you don't consider yourself my wife anymore, I'll be taking this." I grabbed her purse and took out the key to the house from a large keychain she kept there. I took off my wedding ring and placed it in front of Jim. "You can have this, I don't need it anymore," I said, addressing Jim. In the prenuptial agreement she signed, it is stated that in the case of marital infidelity, the guilty party, in this case, Johnny, receives absolutely nothing. Nothing. I'll leave her with her clothes and jewelry, but that's it. I don't think I can continue to pay for her car. Fortunately, I've filed the documents in her name, so it will affect her credit history. "What are you doing?" Johnny said, starting to get up. I grabbed a fork and attempted to stab her hand. She sat back down. "Don't mess with me," I said. "Please, Johnny said, and tears filled her eyes. Mr. Double, please, don't do this, sir. I mean, Mr. Double, please, can't you forgive me? And we can put this behind us, can't we? No, I said, rewinding the video to the point where they started talking about impregnating Johnny. I fast-forwarded the video so that both of them could hear it clearly. You two have been doing this for a whole year and conspired to get pregnant by Jim and pass the child off as mine, I told them. Looking at Johnny at this moment, I hate you, and I pray to God I never see you again. I looked at Jim. Before you speak again, you wanted a deceitful woman, right? I said. Good luck. I don't think you'll get much support from her family and friends. What do you mean? Johnny asked. I shrugged. Check your email, I said. She pulled out her phone and opened the mobile email app. Her eyes widened. What have you done? She asked. I just shared your exploits with your family and friends, I said. You seemed so excited. I knew you'd love to share it with others. You're awful, she whispered. My parents just disowned me, and my sister says she never wants to see me again. My friends think I'm a despicable woman, and now everyone hates me. Can you blame them? I asked calmly. Please, give me another chance, she begged. I shook my head. No, I said. You could have ended this at any time, but you chose not to. So, this is the end of the road. You chose your path, and now you'll sleep in it. I hope it was worth it for you. I think they'll serve you the papers when we get to Springfield. Just sign the papers, and we'll be done with this. Then, you and Jim can sleep together. I don't care, Mr. Double. She said, Is there anything I can do to make amends before you? Yes, I said. There's one thing, actually, two things. Her eyes lit up with anticipation. Disappear, I said. She broke down in tears as I turned and walked away. I struggled to hold back tears as I returned to my compartment after locking and securing the door. My phone rang as I put it in my pocket. It was Johnny's cousin, Lisa. I answered the call. What do you want, Lisa? I asked. So, you finally found out about Johnny, she said. Yes, I said. I suppose you're going to divorce my sister, she asked. Indeed, I said. I've already taken some steps. Okay, she said. I understand. Can I do anything for you, George? She asked. I've always had a special affection for you. To be honest, I also found Lisa quite attractive, but I was married to her cousin, which made her off limits. Well, you're quite attractive too, I said. Lisa had a habit of wearing short skirts and tiny shorts around me, always leaving me impressed. So, you figured it out, she said. Now that you've kicked her out, do you think we can sleep together? She asked. Maybe when the divorce is finalized, I said. Okay, I understand, she said. I've been waiting for you for 7 years, so I think I can wait a few more months. See you when you get back. The call ended, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Eventually, something good could come out of all this. The next 2 days passed quite quickly for me. Most of my time was spent on the phone. I rarely left my compartment to avoid confronting those two traitors. I received information from Fred, confirming what I suspected. Jim Simpson was a womanizer. I noticed he had been divorced twice for infidelity. His last wife also accused him of domestic violence. I supposed Johnny would be inclined towards someone like him, but I hoped she would wake up in time and leave him. Just before the train arrived in Springfield, Johnny knocked on my door. Who's there? I asked through the closed door. It's me, Johnny, she said. What do you want? I asked. I want my husband back, she cried. And I want a faithful wife who would love me. But that didn't happen, did it? Please, Mr. Double, I made a mistake, she exclaimed. You went far beyond a mistake, I said. get out of here before I call security. You should be in economy class, please, pleaded. We can't just talk. I said go away, I don't want to see you again, I heard her mutter as she walked away. Something inside me sympathized with her, but I really didn't care in the slightest. She brought all this upon herself with her lies and disrespect. I got off the train and looked around to see if I could spot Johnny and Jim. I saw them exiting the train a few cars down. Neither of them seemed very happy. Well, I thought to myself as I watched, a man approached Johnny and handed her an envelope made of thick paper. She opened it and immediately burst into tears. I smiled and walked away. I got into my car and drove home. I noticed Johnny's car was gone and all her belongings had been removed, including some furniture she had when we first got married. I packed up the house, removing all the photos that featured her. I didn't want anything to remind me of her. A couple of hours later, I heard a knock on the door. I looked out the window and saw Lisa. God, she looked attractive in those shorts. I opened the door and let her in. She was carrying a large plate of something that smelled like lasagna. She walked in as if she owned the place and placed the plate on the kitchen table. When she turned to me again, I examined her from head to toe. She was wearing a crop top that reached just below her chest, and her shorts were shorter than I remembered. I wanted to make sure you have something tasty, she said. I don't want you to go hungry. Thank you, Lisa, I said. I appreciate it. Her eyes sparkled as she smiled. Would you like to stay and have dinner with me? I'd love to, she said. Go freshen up, and I know where everything is. I went upstairs and freshened up. When I returned, the table was set, and Lisa had even poured each of us a glass of wine. I pulled out a chair, admiring her slender thighs as she sat down. She took my plate and served a generous portion of lasagna, loaded with meat and layers of cheese. I thought it must have taken you a lot of effort. After serving herself a small portion, I looked at her. It looks delicious, I said. Thank you, she replied. I love to cook, especially for those I truly appreciate. Indeed, the lasagna was as tasty as it looked, and I savored every bite, even wiping the plate clean with a piece of garlic bread she had baked. You must have been hungry, she said. I don't waste such delicious food for nothing, I said. It was the best lasagna I've ever had. She smiled, moving closer to me. I'm glad you liked it, she said, sitting on my lap. There's much more where that came from, and maybe someday I'll even bring you dessert, she added, lifting her crop top to reveal her beautiful breasts. I felt a familiar whirlwind as she gave me a passionate kiss. I need to go home and feed my cat, but I'll be back tomorrow. I can't wait, I said. She smiled, getting up. This is just a preview of what I've prepared for you, she said. I guess you'll have to let little George take care of me until your divorce is final. Little George? I asked. That's what I call a device for lonely women, she said. Understood, I said. Well, let's hope Johnny doesn't contest the divorce. She gave me a brief kiss before leaving. Fortunately, Johnny didn't resist the divorce. Apparently, she realized she had painted herself into a corner and decided to end the marriage. She and Jim managed to keep their jobs, but from what I heard, it was a struggle. Fred called me to inform that the signed papers had been filed, and in 30 days, I would be a free man. I was happy. I was relieved to get rid of the unfaithful wife, but some part of me felt like something was missing. I had loved this woman for many years and had hoped to retire with her, surrounded by children and grandchildren, but that was not meant to be. I was also disappointed that I couldn't get back at Jim. I had considered filing a lawsuit for alienation of affection, but Fred said it was a waste of time. I had thought about beating him to the brink of death, but I dismissed that idea since I didn't want to end up in jail. Lisa came over every night with something she had cooked, and we would share dinner. She even made a mark on my calendar, counting down the days until the divorce would be final. She was a relentless tease and even gifted me a couple of DVD discs filled with selfies and homemade videos featuring little George. Soon, the 30 days passed, and I received the documents indicating that the divorce had been completed. Finished, I was surprised not to have heard anything from Johnny, as I had expected her to call me or do something foolish at this point, but she hadn't. Well, Lisa didn't wait for my call. She came over that day and knocked on the door. It seemed strange because I had already given her a key and told her she could come over any time. I opened the door and experienced the shock of my life. There she was on the porch completely naked. I ushered her inside and kissed her passionately, running my hands over her smooth skin. She kissed me with the same passion as she helped me out of my clothes. As we embraced, I realized I had to be with this woman for the rest of my life. She must have thought the same. She turned on her side, looking into my eyes. "I've always loved you, George," she said. "I'll never treat you like my silly cousin did. I want to spend the rest of my life right here with you." "Does that mean you'll marry me?" I asked. She smiled and hugged me. "Yes, darling," she said, "I'll marry you and make you the happiest man on earth." We kissed and made love a bit more before falling asleep in each other's arms. A few days later, Johnny's father called me. Lisa and I had just made love and were lying in bed watching a movie and sharing a bowl of popcorn. "George, Johnny is in the hospital," he said. I sat up in surprise. "What happened?" I asked. "That boy she was with beat her up," he said. I told her to call the police, but she refused. "Did she eventually?" I asked. "Yes, but I don't think it will last if she stays with him," he said. "Well, we'll go there to see how she's doing," I said. "We?" he asked. "Yes, Lisa and I said. "Is Lisa with you?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I couldn't handle this without her." "All right," he said. "We'll meet you at the hospital." After ending our conversation, I explained to Lisa what had happened and told her what I had found out about Jim Simpson. We were both angry at Johnny for what she had done, but neither of us wanted to inflict physical pain on her. We freshened up, got dressed, and headed to the hospital. After speaking with the nurse, we were directed to her room. She looked terrible. Her face was bruised, one eye was swollen, one arm was in a cast, and the other had an intravenous drip. She let out a weak moan as we entered the room. I wanted to hug her and reassure her that everything would be okay, but I held back. "Mr. Double?" she said, and a tear rolled down her cheek. I raised my hand to stop her. "You can call me George," I said. "What happened?" I asked. "Jim wanted to use my car to take his girlfriend on a date, and I told him no," she explained slowly. "He got angry and started hitting me, calling me no man nut. I told him it was my car and that almost half of my salary goes to him. I wouldn't let him use it to impress some woman. He didn't stop hitting me until I threatened to call 911. That's when he ran off. I don't know where he is. I had trouble breathing and my chest hurt a lot, so I called 911, and they brought me here." "Did you tell the police what happened?" Lisa asked. "No," she said. "I was afraid. I thought if I had him arrested, he would kill me when he got out." I shook my head at what I heard. "Let me understand this," I said. "You ran away to live with the guy you slept with, and now he's sleeping with someone else, is that right?" She sobbed and nodded. "Yes," she said, "I did." "But you don't deserve this. He committed a crime and needs to be behind bars," I said. "Johnny," I said, "did you know he had a history of domestic violence?" "I knew he could be a bit rough, but no, I didn't know that," Lisa said. She hugged her cousin and tried to comfort her. Johnny noticed a diamond ring on Lisa's finger. "Are you engaged?" Johnny asked. Lisa smiled and nodded. "Yes," she said. "George and I are getting married." Johnny began to cry, and her tears soaked Lisa's shirt. "But you're still my cousin, and I still love you, even though I think you were foolish for what you did to George." At that precise moment, Johnny's parents entered the room. They were furious when Lisa and I explained what had happened. "All right," said Cliff, Johnny's father, "we'll stay here with you and take you home when you're discharged. You'll stay with us until you can stand on your own." He looked at me and gestured for me to step into the hallway. "What do you know about this guy Simpson?" he asked. I told him what I had learned from Fred, and he nodded, mentally taking notes. And you say he works with Johnny? He asked. Yes, I replied, nodding again. All right, I'll take care of Simpson, he said. I won't argue this with you, the less you know, the better. Cliff walked down the hallway while talking to someone on his mobile phone. I headed back to Johnny's room. Johnny's mother looked at us. I'll stay with her tonight, she said. Cliff will take care of getting her things from that guy's apartment. Thank you for coming by. You're welcome, I said, hugging her. Johnny looked at me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, she said, for everything. Can you forgive me? I hesitated for a moment before speaking. I think so, I said, realizing that 2 other women were watching me. After all, we're still going to be family. Thank you, she said. I approached and hugged her goodbye. Get well soon, I said, kissing her forehead gently. Take good care of him, Johnny told Lisa, please. Lisa smiled and nodded. I will. We left the hospital and headed home. I had no idea what Cliff meant regarding Jim. But I had heard stories about his military service. I also knew he had connections in high and low places. So, I kept an eye on local news, even checking the obituaries. I found nothing, but a week later, a small article appeared in the local newspaper about a man who was attacked and brutally beaten near a local bar. According to the story, a man named Jim Simpson had encountered a group of men who eventually broke 3 ribs, his jaw, kneecap, and arm. Cliff retrieved Johnny's belongings from the guy's apartment and brought them back to his home. Her parents despised what she had done to me, but they still loved their daughter and continued to support her. Lisa and I got married a couple of months later, as her parents had passed away in a car accident a few years ago. Cliff walked her down the aisle and shook my hand. Johnny came with her parents and cried when the minister pronounced us husband and wife. We had a fantastic honeymoon in Las Vegas. Upon our return, we moved her things into the house. She decided that, since I made more than enough for both of us, she would quit her job. Now, I have a new job, she said. What is it? I asked. Making you happy, she said with a mischievous smile. And she did. And then, one day, a few months later, she uttered words every man fears. We need to talk, she said when I came home from work. Is something wrong? I asked, fearing her answer. Well, she said, we'll need to redecorate one of the rooms. Why? I asked. She smiled. Because, she said, you're going to be a dad. I jumped for joy and hugged her, covering her face with kisses. Are you happy? She asked. I'm the happiest man in the world, I said. Then, take me upstairs and show me how happy you are, she said, and so I did, again and again. Yes, I thought, sometimes life gives you lemons, and sometimes, in return, you get something much better. Story 2. I, a 38-year-old male, was married to my wife, a 36-year-old female, for 6 years. My wife and I were old friends before we started dating. She was a close friend of my immediate younger sister, so I knew her right from when she was a teenager. It wasn't until I graduated from college that something happened and brought the 2 of us closer. From there, we fell in love. Since we already knew each other so well, our friendship bloomed, and we ended up dating and marrying after 1 year. Before my wife and I married, we agreed to only have kids once we were ready. She was the one who proposed it, and initially, I thought it would be only for the first 2 to 4 years of our marriage. I loved children, and I thought she said that because she wanted us to spend more time together or get better paying jobs that would put things in place before the kids arrived. Fast forward to 5 years after we married, I told my wife that I was ready for us to have children. However, she kept coming up with multiple excuses that became annoying. Either she would say something about going for medical checkups to be sure her ovaries were in good shape, or we could just get a dog instead of having a child. Her excuses kept coming for almost a year, and because we were always fighting and arguing, we started to get distant from each other. It's not like I intentionally got distant, she was the one who started it. She refused to make my meals, do my laundry, or even sleep in her bed with me. Seeing all of this made me angry. I wouldn't have been so worried about having children if it were left to me alone. I was only concerned that her biological clock was ticking, and she wasn't saying anything about having kids. Even before we married, I had always imagined having at least one child with her and how we'd be a big, happy family. But my wife was trying to frustrate that reality. When our arguments and fights continued to the extent that I couldn't take it anymore, we were forced to sit and talk with a marriage counselor. Our marriage was slowly falling apart, and it was the exact opposite of what I had in mind for us all those years of being married. I thought my wife and I were on the same page, but during one of our marriage counseling sessions, I found out we weren't in my presence. My wife told the counselor that she hated babies and couldn't even imagine having one. Also, she said she was very concerned about her body and wasn't ready to ruin her shape for a child or pause her life to care for a child. When I heard that, I felt so betrayed because she never mentioned it while we were dating, and she didn't say a thing about it even on the days we kept arguing about it. I didn't know what to do or say, so I left the session to clear my head. It was painful to discover that my wife played on my intelligence despite knowing how much I loved children. I was so mad at her. When we got home, we did not speak for almost 2 weeks, and she wasn't even bothered. Around that time, she would come home late at night and go to bed. The following day, she would leave for work early. I tried as much as possible to not let everything weigh me down, but I couldn't. It really affected me. I imagined my whole life without a child because my wife cared so much about her body. The most painful part was that even when we had this agreement before we married, she never mentioned anything about not liking babies or not wanting to pause her life to raise kids. If she had told me, I wouldn't have married her because we had different opposing values. There's no way I would have accepted to marry a woman who hated babies and didn't want one when I loved babies and wanted at least 2 children. Throughout the time my wife and I were not talking to each other, she never showed concern for me, not even for one day. Instead, she would come home looking cheerful and happy, then go to bed. I had to make my meals and care for the house. Some days, there were also nights my wife did not sleep at home. On those nights, she would text me late at night and say she was sleeping over at one of her girlfriend's places. I don't know which one hurt more between finding out that my wife would never be a mother or her sleeping out and spending time with her friends while neglecting me. Months after my last counseling session, our marriage got worse. Our argument started again, but it got worse this time. My wife became something else, and any time we fought, she would say I could go ahead and divorce her if I didn't want us to be married anymore. Every time she said this, it broke my heart because I thought it'd be better to fix things instead of divorcing. I didn't understand why she kept saying that until I made a shocking discovery. One day, I received a call from my bank about strange charges on my account. When I checked it out, I saw that the charges were going into an apartment complex I had no idea about. I told the bank I had no idea about the apartment and tried to get them to charge back. After talking to the bank people, I decided to go and check out the apartment myself since it was in the same town I lived in. It didn't make sense for someone to charge my account because I was careful not to leave any of my bank or card details online. After driving for a while, I successfully located the apartment and decided to go to the apartment to see who was using my information to pay rent. When I knocked on the door, a young man in his early or mid-20s came out. When he opened the door, my eyes caught a glimpse of my wife's picture hanging directly on the other side of the wall. I was so confused, and the guy started talking before I could ask the questions in my head. He said he knew I was my wife's husband because she was his sugar mommy. Immediately, I heard that, I had goosebumps on my skin, and my lower stomach churned. He said my wife rented the apartment for him, and I had to keep my mouth shut, or he would steal her completely from me. Talk about audacity. I couldn't even confront him like I had in mind, but I had a better idea. I was so mad at his audacity, so I began searching for his landlord and found him the next day. I reported everything to his landlord, and several days later, he was thrown out of the house. As for my wife, after I found out about her affair, I didn't even say anything because there was nothing to talk about. I began to reconnect the dots and realized my wife had been cheating on me for a very long time, but I was too blinded to see it. My wife caused me the most pain, so I couldn't let her go scot-free. I filed a report to the police, and my wife was arrested for identity theft and eventually charged. We also divorced because I realized we were like water and oil, and she no longer had a place in my life. I now understand why she kept saying I could divorce her if I wanted. It was because she had someone else in her life and was using my money to pay his rent. This happened to me a very long time ago, and as I share this, I have a beautiful 3-year-old daughter, and I'm married to a beautiful younger woman. After things ended with my wife, I was down for a year plus, but I realized that I was living in the past instead of the present. So I decided to build the kind of life I wanted. I have never been so relieved and happier. I'm happy to hear that you have moved on and have finally gotten what you wanted. Your wife played you, but she lost it all in the end. She didn't tell you from your dating days that she didn't like children because she knew you would leave her. She was a very selfish person, and she got what she deserved. You are smart to turn your focus from the past to the future. I hope you enjoy your new marriage. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Story 3. My wife and I used to be best friends before we married. We both met in college, but we became close friends about 3 years after we left college. My wife was going through a very tough season when our friendship started. She had recently lost her father to cancer, and around the same time, she caught her best friend with her fiancé. I can't explain how we got so close, but I remember we started talking one day and never stopped for 2 years. We were best friends and told each other stuff. I was always happy to have her around because I loved her aura. She was always so energetic, and her laughter was heart-melting. Aside from this, my wife and I were very much alike. We had similar passions, loved the same sports, and had similar hobbies. It was almost like we were born to be with each other. As time passed, I realized I had fallen in love with my wife, so I boldly asked her out, and she said yes. We ended up dating for 10 months, and we married. Being married to my wife was fun initially because we were always eager to explore and try new things together. She has a very open mind and would jump on any idea I had. We didn't have any kids yet, but we made a solid plan to have kids after 3 years. While my wife worked as a secretary in a big pet store, I was a mechanic and worked in a car brand company. We were both actively planning for our future and a particular vision from when we dated. While we were dating, my wife and I agreed to learn at least 3 different languages before we grew old, and the first language on our list was French. We could have simply downloaded a language app, learned on YouTube, or taken an online language class, but my wife insisted that we travel to France to learn the language, feel the culture, and be in a class where a native French speaker would teach us. It sounded like a great idea, and since we loved to explore, we started saving towards it. For 2 years, we put money aside every month for our France trip, and when we believed it was enough, we made our trip. It was our first time being in France, so you could imagine we were like children who had been to Disneyland for the first time. We loved everything we saw, and being around people who spoke French constantly motivated us to be serious about learning the language. We started classes the same week since we had already checked out the school we wanted to enroll in before traveling to France. We were in a class of about 15 people who also wanted to learn the language, and it was so much fun. Our class was only meant to be for 3 months. My wife believed 3 months of learning directly from a French native would help us learn the basics of the language and speak it, and she was right. Living in an environment of mostly French speakers helped too. For the 3 months we lived in France, we had so much fun and enjoyed our stay there. We also had the opportunity to relate and mix with other people and made a couple of friends. My wife was a very social butterfly, and she made friends like it was nothing. She even had more friends in our class than I did, and I didn't mind. I knew it was her personality, and trying to find more people to practice the language with, well, I was wrong. My wife had been involved with something way higher than trying to practice the language with her new friends. Towards the end of our class, it was mandatory for everyone to take an examination, and we had successfully entered that phase. One day while my wife and I were in our short-term apartment preparing for our exams that afternoon, her phone buzzed. She had left her phone on one of her textbooks and went into the room to sort out what she'd wear later. When I looked at her phone screen, I saw that the message was written in French, and I was impressed that my wife had reached the extent of getting messages in French. So, to test my French reading skills, I read the message to see if I could understand it, and that worked to a level. I couldn't understand the whole message because there were words that confused me. Meanwhile, I had understood something in the message that looked suspicious. So, to be sure of what I had read, I used a language translator, and I was perplexed at what I read through translating the messages into English. I discovered that my wife was having an affair with one of her classmates. He had been her seat partner a couple of times, and they got along well. Not just that, they were also planning to cheat in the exam and also cheat on me afterward. By that, I mean sleep together. I was so mad, and I felt betrayed. I could not even believe that my wife was having an affair with someone she barely knew for 3 months, and she chose to destroy our marriage and the memories and sabotage every plan we made for our future. After I got a grip on myself, I snapped a picture of the message with my phone. Immediately after I did that, my wife walked into the living room. I tried to control my emotions like most men said they did on this channel, but I couldn't. It was eating me up inside, and before I knew it, I confronted her and yelled at her. She tried to lie that there was nothing going on between them and that maybe I had misinterpreted the message. So I showed her the English translation, and she kept quiet. After staying silent for a few minutes, she said she could explain and was only trying to explore and have fun. I nearly exploded when she said that, but I had to stay calm and walk out of her. Immediately, I left the house, and I went straight to her school. I showed the text message to the person I knew was in charge. When the text message reached the right people, all the previous exams my wife and her affair partner had written were automatically canceled. Since we had a couple more papers left before I returned to our country, I had to stay with one of the new male friends I made there till I wrote my last paper. After my last paper, I returned home before my wife. I avoided her the whole time we were in France, and I didn't take any of her calls or listen to the numerous voicemails she sent. When she returned home, she had met all her things on the front porch. Even at that, she still tried to beg me, and she claimed she and her affair partner had not done anything serious except kisses. At that point, I didn't care if they had done anything serious. Her intentions were all that mattered. We eventually divorced, but before we went our separate ways, my results came out, and I aced it. As for my wife and her affair partner, they were told they could retake the class if they wanted, but that would be at the expense of another fee. She couldn't take another class because it took us 2 years to collaboratively gather that money and pay for our accommodation. It still hurts when I remember how we were so in love with each other, our plans, and the kind of life we were building. But it's all for the best for me. Being single is better than being with a woman who jumps on any man she gets close to. I know I have moved on, but it will take a long time to trust a woman or date one. I know how you feel. Yes, it hurts to make future plans with someone, and they mess things up in the end. It's crazy how your wife could cheat on you, and her reason for doing that was exploring and having fun. Whatever happened to hiking mountains for fun? Anyways, this was meant to happen sooner or later, but it's good that you're over and done with this. I'm sure you will find someone else, but take all the time you need. Take care.